Welcome to the Agents Angle, where we look into the world of football agency, where the future of the industry is often as unpredictable as the amount of time added on after several VAR referrals. I'm Jonathan Booker.
And I'm Peter Paleologos. And one group who choose to enter the industry as football agents are former players. And we are joined in this episode by one former international who has successfully made the transition from top player to top agent.
In addition to that, we will also be looking at some of the clauses that came to the fore in the recent transfer windows, including restrictions on whom a player can be sold to and mandatory community duties in player contracts.
All that to come on this episode of The Agents Angle.
Yes, folks, we're back and hopefully going to bring to you this week a slightly less technical and intense episode of The Agents Angle. And I'm going to make every effort to avoid those dreaded four letters at every opportunity and any other related topics to them. But for me at least, we have a great episode ahead, and the primary focus is going to be the interview with our guest today. And for me, he is a rarity in the agents world, because not only is he a former professional player who's played at international level and in some of the top leagues, but has also managed to transition into a top agent representing players who likewise are internationals and also play in the top leagues around the world. Some would argue that a player becoming an agent is a relatively easy transition compared to other people, but to do that successfully at the top level is rare in my experience.
Yes, Jonathan, I'm actually also excited for our guest today and the topic in particular, transitioning from a player to an agent. Now, on the scouting side and the technical side, being a former player is very useful in terms of being an agent to be able to pick talent and know who's got upside to make a professional or have a big career. And also former players who become agents have relationships with clubs, football directors, other players. It's word of mouth, as we know, from the dressing rooms. I know a lot of players are easy to get referrals and networks. But as with all agents, it is a challenge regardless if you're a former player or another type of professional that's moved into agency. And talking of former players, there are several that come to mind who have become agents. Jose Enrique, the former Liverpool fullback, I believe is a football agent. Yakubu, striker, the ex-Everton star, he's turned to agency. And finally, former Arsenal left-back and Spanish left-back Nacho Monreal is, I believe, a new agent on the scene. So a lot of ex-players are approaching the agent world.
And what makes it even more of an achievement with our guest is that he's done it independently with his own agency and not got a so-called leg up in terms of carrying someone else's established brand or a big agency name. But aside from that, agents have been very busy in recent months. We've seen the opening and closing of many mid-season transfer windows around the world. And with that, we now start to see more evidence of weird and wonderful player and agent demands and, of course, various clauses from that transfer period. And despite some in the media leading us to believe these are often ingenious new ideas and clauses from clubs and agents, they are, for me anyway, in a large part, an enhancement, a variation, or simple rewording or even renaming of something that has often been done before.
Yes, we've got three articles that we reviewed, but one article headline, it's the Anti-Saudi clause, as we call it. Barcelona insists on unprecedented anti-Saudi, I would call it club clause, in two players' new contracts ahead of deadline day. Just to summarise, this is an unprecedented clause where Barcelona is introducing the anti-Saudi clause in contracts of two key players to prevent them from joining Saudi pro clubs, especially the big four. The players are targeted here with this clause are Pedri, who's 22, and Gavi, who's 20. So big talents and players they want to secure, I believe, to the end of this decade. What is the reason for the clause? It is probably a reaction, maybe in this case from Barca, to stop young European talents moving to Saudi clubs for lucrative contracts. We know that the Saudi interest has been very strong and now it's more strategic. They're looking for certain type of players for their leagues. It's not the first year when they really went full ball. But Barcelona's strategy is a counteraction strategy. They insert this clause to protect young talents from being lured away, but also to ensure commitment to their club. And this is interesting because the anti-Saudi clause was also mentioned previously in relation to Napoli. Napoli's Aurel De Laurentiis said it was a clause they wanted to put in Victor Osimhen's contract. And what that was, more of a dual exit clauses, where a contract will have one for Saudi clubs and one for the rest of the world, with the Saudi clause set to be twice as high. Now, that's what the article reported. Now, this is a potential trend. Other European clubs might adapt the Barcelona and maybe the Napoli strategy here. Is it functional, this clause? But it's going to be interesting going forward how these release clauses are going to go and how are agents going to deal with this clause, Jonathan, going forward. So very interesting article. We see a lot of these clauses, but this one's the hot one at the moment in contract negotiations.
As you said, some of these articles have described this particular clause as an anti-Saudi clause and presented it as a novelty, innovative or unprecedented. And I think we need to step back a bit from that framing because these, in a way, aren't anything new to me, and they're probably not to quite a few people with a few variations. There have been similar such clauses and agreements going back some time, whether it be the old days of the unwritten or unofficial agreements. Some may say gentlemen's agreements between clubs or even between a player and a club, that after the transfer of a player, they wouldn't be permitted to play against the selling club, at least for the remainder of that season. Albeit there are some infamous cases where people went against those agreements. So much for the term gentleman. And in more recent times, we have had agreements whereby release clauses are structured in a way to disadvantage some clubs and not others when it comes to transfers, whether based on local rivalries, a rival for a particular competition or league, or even in favour of certain leagues and nations over others. So I would say this, in general terms, is nothing new from what I've seen reported thus far. Maybe it's because of the entities involved. Firstly, Saudi Arabian football, which is arguably the financial powerhouse in football terms at the moment. And secondly, Barcelona, and I don't think I'm speaking out of turn here, have well publicised financial complications when it comes to anything they do in the transfer market. And are Barcelona actually restricting themselves in a way with such clauses in what they can do in the transfer market? Some may say, why not just set an exorbitantly high release fee? But is an agent and player going to accept that, as they may restrict themselves in the future with where a player may move? And in all honesty, we don't know how high or how long football finances will continue to grow, because release fees seen as untouchable 10 years ago are arguably seen as almost reasonable transfer fees now. Plus, do we really know how deep Saudi football pockets are? But where I can see some form of possible thought process behind this from a Barcelona perspective is that we're now past that tipping point, especially with superstar players, where player salaries outweigh transfer fees. And so if a club can pay a comparatively minimal release fee, whether it be a release clause or whatever, they can then budget for a really high salary or signing on bonus that encourages a player and or the agent to agitate for a move. And then we're coming back all the way to the points we've discussed many times before with just cause, aggravating circumstances, and of course the case of Diarra.
It's going to be very interesting how clubs are going to go forward adopting these. But I want to take the agent's perspective here. If you're an agent of these players at Barca, how would you react when this clause is put to you in a negotiation? How would I consider and advise on this type of clause? Because it's not just a clause that stops players potentially going to certain leagues or clubs, but also you've got the interest of the player, and that's the important thing. How does that fall in line with you as an agent representing players? How does that affect your duties and the best interest of the player? It's a tough balancing act because, as we know, we all want to retain good relationships with clubs. And clubs like Barca, mega clubs, that any agent who can work with those type of clubs is, I suppose, the epitome of success. However, we do not want to close off opportunities to our players to other clubs. So it's a fine balancing act, Jonathan. Also, if you're a big agency that's dealing with elite talent, and you see these type of clauses, you can't go to the Saudi clubs or you can't go to 3, 4 competitors. This can undermine future deals because negotiations about leverage. And we know at the higher end, only about 40 to 50 clubs can afford top elite talent, whether the younger side as these two Barcelona players or other stars at the top at the moment. So only 40 or 50 clubs can afford the transfer fees or release fees. And if you are in a negotiation where the club is trying to caveat or carve out 5 or 10 clubs from a future transfer, that is a dilemma for the big agencies, the super agents, or whatever agent is dealing on the player side, how you would deal with this clause. Yes, there are ways to mitigate, but as I said, you're taking a huge piece of future transfer opportunity off the table, Jonathan.
Also, you've got the aspect of who the agent is actually representing apart from the player. Are they representing the club? That's another variation. And then you've got the permitted dual representation aspect as well. But in my view, some of the leagues and competitions are in a better position to benefit from such no-sell clauses, as they don't have such stringent cost controls as other leagues. Arguably, we may see this type of anti-Saudi clause creep into football, especially European football, more and more. And I'd be interested to see how the various ECA, European Club Association clubs, react to it. But in essence, there's a big reservation here for me, as these clauses are arguably anti-competitive. They're a restraint of trade, if not in some cases possibly illegal. And we can liken them to restrictive covenants in other professions. And I can see that comparison, but the football dynamic is so very, very different, not least the length of a player's career. And from the conversations I've had in the past with employment lawyers on matters relating to the likes of restricted covenants, they come with a variety of complex issues and problems. The first being proving that any such restriction is reasonable, and then making the restrictions enforceable. But in a football sense, I fear the allowances for such clauses may risk the football authorities achieving the opposite of their spoken objectives in terms of such things as competitive balance. And also, this further fractures and provides inconsistencies in the transfer system between nations, leagues, and competitions. Release clauses, yes, as it brings an element of certainty and clarity, as I've said in the past. But these sort of restrictive or tiered or no-sell clauses, personally, I don't like it. If a club sells a player, or more correctly, their registration, that's the club's choice. And they have to accept the consequences of that decision, whether it's immediate or somewhere down the line. They are arguably compensated for deciding to do that. And if they have a say over the future transfer of a former player, beyond that of a first refusal or a buyback clause, whatever you want to call it, aren't they having an influence or manipulating the transfer market, as in any agent acting for them for that matter? But this is going to get very messy if the football authorities don't get a grip of it. And that the aim of a fair, consistent, transparent, and stable transfer system that some people repeatedly bleat on about is going to get no closer whatsoever, in my opinion.
Yes, it's interesting you say that because it's not just a club to club issue. We've got European competitions. We've also got leagues versus leagues. I mean, we know that some leagues change their transfer window in order to take advantage from other leagues. But I think in terms of the legalities here, these type of clauses do affect contractual independence and free will to choose clubs. Would FIFA look at them or a case come at CAS in the future? That would be very, very interesting because this will be a sort of, I'm not saying new jurisprudence, but it'd be a new action that will be looked at and a lens we put on what type of clause these are. As you mentioned, Jonathan, are they anti-competitive? What impacts do they have on the ability for someone to contract under employment? But we're seeing these type of clauses gaining popularity in football clubs, and I think it's a watch this space. Another clause that is of increasing importance is clauses that relate to corporate social responsibility, CSR. And these particular clauses are starting to be reflected in players' contracts with clubs. whereby players have got certain obligations to support charities or corporate social responsibility initiatives that the club undertakes. And we saw a very interesting article that relates to a Bulgarian club, which we don't talk too much about Bulgaria, but it's good to go to different countries. And it relates to CSKA Sofia, one of the clubs from Bulgaria. They've launched or integrated corporate social responsibility into their player contract. It's seen as a new benchmark in football. I'll just summarize it briefly. In all player contracts at CSK Sofia, there's a mandatory charity clause. It's introduced as a CSKA Foundation clause and requires players to participate in charitable initiatives. It's about the club philosophy. It supports their values of charity, empathy, social responsibility, and players have to serve as role models beyond the pitch. Overall, this clause has seen very positive reaction. The CSKA players, with all players signing up, and obviously their agents supporting the sign up to this clause. And this clause integrates itself with the CSKA Foundation, where there's certain initiatives that are listed where you can choose a charity. We know that many clubs have community programs and player activations. However, this clause type arrangement is quite a unique offering, and I've got to give credit to TSKA Sofia and the players who have bought into the program. But also, agents need to be aware to explain these clauses to their players and what their obligations and responsibilities are once they sign a contract with that club that has these type of clauses in the contract. Jonathan.
I think it worthwhile pointing out that we don't have all the details on what exactly these clauses entail, but on the face of it, like you, I think it's very welcome. A lot of players arguably do, for the main part, have a fair bit of downtime to facilitate such roles and duties, and I can sense players, including clients, clamoring to take exception with me on that observation. And as an agent, I would always encourage clients to do club and community engagements whenever it was reasonable to do so, if not even ask about any that are available, not least as it often benefits everyone involved, including the player. Footballers are a long time forgotten by people at clubs and in the community connected to that club. And those players that are seen to be more proactive during their time at a club doing such things are readily remembered, I think, favourably, even if they aren't the star player, and even when they've moved on to another club. But it is a delicate balance at times, as I think the players participating in such engagements must do it with a genuine interest and some willing. And that is where the dynamic and understanding between player and agent is so important on such matters, as well as, importantly, club liaison officers, club community officers, or even club secretaries and other people at clubs who are vital in helping facilitate those right community appointments. Because, and I've been in this situation, there's nothing worse than a surly player turning up in a bad mood and presenting their own image or that of the club in a negative light. Because in all honesty, they don't want to be there and or have been forced into it as part of their contract. But also, agents have to recognise that such a community profile can create potentially more commercial opportunities or even substantiate the value of a player's image, either at the time of the appointment or at some point in the future in their career. But that's a very delicate balance in itself, because player and agent need to be clear what they can do and can't do in connection to the club from a commercial aspect when it comes to those contracts. In this case of CSKA Sofia, is this new? In a way, I think it is, because CSKA seem to have presented the players with a choice of causes they can almost become ambassadors of, rather than force a particular cause or appointment on them. And that approach increases the chances of the player having and or developing a genuine interest and connection with that cause or with that community programme. But community duty clauses in general do already exist in standard playing contracts with various leagues, competitions, and associations around the world, not just specified by a few clubs. I think it's actually contained in Clause 4 of the standard playing contract of the EPL and EFL in England. The argument there, however, is that that is very much seen at times as a chore by some, and it's effectively forced on the player. And for me, in my experience, that 6 hour minimum, I think it is again, a lot of it is primarily devoted to media duties rather than community. So there's a bit of skew there in terms of Premier League contracts and contracts in England.
Yes, and I might follow up your point here about a Premier League club that's doing an interesting community engagement, social responsibility initiative. But I'll just go to my experience in Asia, where we get a lot of players into certain clubs, and it's expected. And it's also a cultural thing where players have to make themselves available for social engagements, charity work, promotion, and that needs to be explained thoroughly because obviously there is also a culture difference. So that's very prevalent in Asia, and it may not be written in the contract. It's the opposite, Jonathan, where some of these things are not written in the contract, like CSKA's put a clause in which an agent can explain fully, and that's what our job is. But an agent also has to explain where something's not in a contract, and you want to tell the player that, yes, certain things are not in the contract, but culturally in these leagues in Asia or these clubs in Asia, you're expected to do A, Y, Z, whatever it is. So that is important from an agent's point of view to give that information to a player because it's very easy to lose face in that part of the world. But I did mention Premier League, and recently Arsenal has the Club Link project, a community initiative of its own, where a lot of its academy players engage with community programs. This is starting 2023, partners with the Premier League and Professional Footballers Association. It's overseen by a Club Link officer. It's about getting the academy players involved in community initiatives. However, it's also about engagements, and those engagements are not just about the academy players, but also the Premier League players, the Women's Super League players, etc. And you mentioned these clauses in EPL and EFL contracts, and Arsenal's obviously built an infrastructure on the back of that. You mentioned CSKA, Sofia, but it's also the fact that the bigger Premier League clubs are really engaged in that, and Arsenal's taken that initiative a little bit further, Jonathan.
Quite clearly another aspect that agents need to be fully across, but also be thoroughly aware of when it comes to the opportunities and benefits it can provide to the player clients and themselves, and importantly, how to convey those to the clients. So just another complexity to add to that football agent skill set. And in the world of football agents, there are many who have ventured into this complex and often unpredictable industry, some finding great success, whilst many others have struggled to make their mark. And football agents come from a diverse range of backgrounds, bringing with them unique perspectives, skills, and experiences. Among them, one group that somewhat naturally transitions into the role of a football agent are those who once graced the pitch as professional players. However, even for this group, success in the world of agency is far from guaranteed. Many find the transition challenging, achieving only modest success, whilst only a select few manage to thrive and establish themselves with sustained longevity in this industry. Some former players opt to join the ranks of established agencies, often the same agencies that once represented them during their playing careers. But only a small number have dared to strike out on their own, building something from the ground up. And of those, only a handful are recognisable both for their accomplishments as players and then for their impact as agents. So today, we are fortunate to welcome a rare individual who embodies this dual success, a rarity in the football agency world. A player who enjoyed an impressive professional career with spells at clubs such as Derby County and Middlesbrough in the English Premier League, as well as spells with the likes of Lille and FC Copenhagen, but also earning 19 caps from Denmark, including appearances at the UEFA Euros. And since hanging up his boots, he has built a successful career as an agent in his own right, representing top talent who play in leagues such as Serie A and the English Premier League. And now he is not only a recognised name from his achievements on the pitch, but also for his significant contributions in the football agents world. It's our pleasure today to welcome Mikkel Beck to the Agents Angle. Mikkel, welcome.
Hello, and thanks for having me on your show.
Yeah, good to have you, Mikkel. Welcome. Just to start off, right back to the beginning from your time in football agency, can you tell us a bit briefly about your journey into the football agency world after retiring as a player? And was becoming an agent part of your post-playing career plan?
I mean, first of all, I was more or less thrown into changing what I was actually supposed to do. So I was a footballer, but unfortunately, I had to retire prematurely already at the age of 29 only. I would have, liked to play on for another 5-6 years, but I was very unfortunate to catch a bacterial while having a scan done in a clinic in Lille, where I was playing at that time, and basically I had to stop. One day after having trained. So I was thrown out in a situation I was not really ready for, and it took me a little while to not only accept what had happened, but also to get my head around, what to do next. Because all I wanted to do was just to keep playing football, but my body wasn't able to do it anymore. So I had to find out what to do next. And I will say, though, that I was not 100% sure what I wanted to go into, so I tried a few things. I tried to do some commentary on Danish and English television. I was thinking about maybe start working for Nike, who had been my sponsors throughout my career. Yeah, I was even thinking about maybe going into management or becoming a coach, a sporting director. But I don't know why, but I think at the end of the day, I decided to have a go at as an agent because I wanted to change my life a little bit. As a player, I was always told what to do. I was told when to basically work and when to stop working. It was hard sometimes to organize my life outside football because football was all I was doing, basically. It was all, organized around my football. But if I became an agent and I became, let's say, an independent agent for myself, I could suddenly start organizing my time a little bit differently. And with the many languages I had learned throughout my career, I could also now start really using them to something important. And I also like the idea about negotiating contracts, giving good advice to players. That's why I had a go at being an agent. And when I started 20 years ago, I honestly just said to myself, let's see how it goes. And I can always stop and do something else. But here I am speaking to you now 20 years later and basically having built up a very successful business. So I'm happy to say that I chose right in doing it. But at the beginning, I wasn't sure.
You mentioned at the beginning you weren't sure. What was the biggest challenge in transitioning from the football pitch as a player to being a football agent and a prominent agent at that?
Well, I mean, it's hard to say. The problem is, it doesn't matter really what you decide to do afterwards. You have to accept that you're suddenly not the most important anymore. It's like, I suppose it's like becoming a father. Suddenly you are just number two. And when you're a footballer, if you have a meeting with someone, everyone waits for you. If you're 15 minutes late, they'll still be there. What I found out is when you stop that business and you go into a new business, you start, let's say, behind the queue. And if you have a meeting with the president or a sporting director and you are late, then you might even turn up for the meeting a bit late and then they're not there anymore. So you have to accept, let's say, not being the most important one anymore and just taking a step back. But of course, you have to be good at what you get into. But I think the big challenge was that. Also, and I think you can relate to that, when I started being an agent, the agency business did not always have the best of reputation. So it was also a little bit of a challenge for me to go into something where I could maybe, be seen as some of the ones that had not always had a good reputation. So I had to be sure that if I did it, I had to do it my way, but in my eyes, I had to do it in the right way. So I was known for something good, not for something bad.
You played obviously in Denmark. We mentioned England, obviously France. Football agencies about relationships and networks. How did your network as a player help you establish yourself as an agent going forward?
Well, I started in Denmark, of course, because I'm Danish, yeah? And then I moved to Germany and then England and then France. And I was fortunate to learn all those languages and also meet so many interesting people on my way. So I will say it was a good head start that most of the players I had played with or sport directors I have, let's say, met on the way, that I could call them and they would take me serious and have a meeting with me. That was a really good start in the business. But I also realized quickly that it was just the start. It did not guarantee me a long career. Because again, if you come into a new business and you make a mistake, then those good contacts would not be of any importance afterwards. So I had to make sure that I used my contacts rightly, but also that I also did my job in a good way. Then eventually I could probably build up something stronger than some others who had not been footballers like me.
As a former player and someone who's played at the elite level, also national team level and European tournaments, understanding a player's mindset is an advantage for an agent because they've got certain insights. But in general, do you think being a former player at the top level, at the elite level, makes for a better agent? Or is it the case that players are no different to other persons in that some make good agents and some don't make good agents, much like players make good managers and some don't?
I think you have to have a lot of patience because sitting down, trying to understand someone, another human being, and trying to really give them the best possible advice, you have to want it because it takes time. But if you do it in the right way and this other person listens to you, it can create some magic relationship where you can build up an incredible understanding between a player and an agent that, can build some incredible things together. But I will say, because I get the question often, in my opinion, it is an advantage to have played before. But again, it doesn't guarantee you success. But if you use it rightly, then I think it can be a big, big advantage to you. I have to sometimes sit and understand players, what they say to me. They have had some managers saying something to them in the dressing room, or they had an argument with another player or with another teammate. And if I had not been myself in those situations during my career, would I then really be able to understand exactly what had gone on? Maybe not. I do think I understand my players very well. And I think it is because of being in there myself, being in that dressing room. I know exactly the banter and I know what goes on. But it doesn't mean that someone who has never played before cannot become a good agent. I just think for me, it has always helped me that I have tried it myself before. And I think, like you said, it's the same with coaches. If you use your experience as a former player right, then I think it can be a big, big advantage to you going forward. But if you don't, it doesn't guarantee you success just because you have played. Because you have to reinvent yourself a little bit also. You can use what you have, but you always have to be open to reinvent and use it to maybe becoming even, more intelligent yourself. Yeah, that's the way, at least, I think you become the best possible person going forward.
In terms of players today, do you think they have a better understanding of agents compared to not necessarily yourself, but players in general? When you were playing, do they have a better understanding of agents, whether it be the role or their duties?
I really don't know. I can only speak from my own experience, of course. I had one agent, and I only had one agent during my whole career. I felt at that time it was a big advantage to me not having changed agent too many times. So I trusted in this person, and I really felt we created a special bond. Today, there's many, many more agents out there than there used to be. There used to be very few, and if someone wanted to work with you, you should be lucky. Today, you can change an agent every single day. I think there's too many agents out there, and of course, because there are too many agents also struggle. It's tough for everyone to make good living out of this job and become successful because there's so many out there that want to do the same as you want to do. But whether players understand the role of an agent better today, I don't know. I mean, I think the players I work with understand my role very well, but I cannot speak for other agents. It depends how they work with their players. But I at least try from the beginning of a working relationship. I try to be very transparent and I try to show exactly from the beginning how we are going to work going forward. And I try to be very close to the parents from the beginning because my DNA has always been to work with players very young. And hopefully by then create this kind of special bond with the players, with their parents, and then build something up which becomes hopefully magic. And for me, that has been the right way of doing things. Maybe it won't work for others, but that's how I have created my success.
I'm going to ask a question which we ask regularly on the show to our guests. If you were to describe the football agency world in one word, what would it be and why?
Well, of course, the obvious answer would be business, because we know out there has become, there's more money involved today than there used to be when I played myself. You have to make, bigger decisions on behalf of your clients. I think it's become a big business, maybe more so as it used to be. Yeah, it'd probably be hard to find one word, but if you ask me, I would probably say business.
It's interesting because we haven't heard that before, Jonathan. Business, but yes, it is.
Then again, you decide as an agent how you want to work. I don't think about it being a business on a daily basis, but I think if you look at it from the outside in the big picture, I think that's also what you hear and what you read many times, that, it's a business today, more than it used to be.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. It's become big business, a lot of media, everyone's interested in deals and transfers and player stories
Yeah,
and also the agent, and not just the agent, but also some football lawyers. You see a lot of photos of being involved in big deals. So they become not the superstars, but they've also become a brand in some
I think
ways.
so.
So I tend to think,
I think
yeah.
so, yeah.
If I were to ask Mikkel as a player what qualities make a good football agent, would you give me a very different answer to that of Mikkel the agent? In your term, what are the best qualities to make a good football agent?
Experience, trustworthy, hardworking, good networker, good negotiator, and a good listener.
Yeah, listeners very important because sometimes I've been in the
Yeah.
industry a long time. A lot of people, have a certain way of just they want to get the message across. But yes, especially in today's age, listening is very important. I want to focus, Mikkel, on like many agents representing clubs, not just players. In situations where when you're representing a club, does being a former top player is that a disadvantage for you in the sense of you may subconsciously be biased towards more players being a former player? Or is it, as you mentioned, business and you're happy to represent clubs to try to obtain players that they want to sign?
Well, I mean, I know agents who are players' agents, and I know agents who are club agents. Some are successful as club agents, some are successful as player agents. In my opinion, it's two totally different things and two totally different approaches to this world. And I will say, since I started, have always wanted to be a player's agent, always seen myself as a player's agent, and certainly not like a club agent. So what it means is I have always had my players signed. So I've had contracts with my players. I have told them it was important for me to give them importance. Because when I sign a contract with a player, in my opinion, and I've always seen it the same way, it's like a marriage, you sign, and by signing that binding contract, you give them your word that you will fight for them until the end. And you will always help them making hopefully the right decisions and hopefully help them to becoming big players and having long and successful careers. So I have always said to everyone who called me about, can you help me with this player, this player? I always said, no, I can't help you with players that are not on the contract with myself. I work first and foremost for my own players. And it's always been like that. And I think that's also probably one of the biggest reasons why I've had so long working relationships with my players. I mean, a good example is Simon Kerr, who just hung up his boots 1 month ago. I managed to work from him from the age of 15 until 35. So 20 years we were together. I just don't think you hear a lot about those stories anymore. Players don't stay very long with their agents, strangely enough. But I always said, if you are a player's agent, you show your players you are really there for them. You are very transparent from the beginning and you work hard. And certainly also that you are good at answering their questions when they need questions answered. Then I don't see why a player should not stay with his agent. It's much better for him. But of course, if you don't do your job right, then there's so many out there that the players can take instead of you.
You've obviously seen now 20 plus years as an agent. How do you think agents and agencies have evolved over that time, just from your perspective?
Yeah, I think they, at least the big agencies have become bigger, more powerful. Where in the old days it was, let's say, it was smaller agencies, maybe more personal. But for sure, we have seen some big agencies becoming really big, and that's probably the biggest change I think over the years. Again, like we spoke about before, there's much more money involved today in the business, and you really have to be good at helping your players making the right decisions where maybe the decisions were not as big before. Now they're very big because you can really make a big mistake if you make the wrong decision. So I think the thing that agencies have become bigger, more people involved, probably the biggest change in my opinion. And also, like we spoke about before, agencies today are not just agencies. Now you also have to think about how you present yourself in the public. You have to think about social media, about your image and things like that. Before, people, I think, could be much more, let's say, anonymous. Today, you're public, and if you make a mistake, people know about it.
You mentioned earlier the importance of building that relationship with families. And one of the trends, I suppose it's been in the industry for a while, is players bypassing traditional agents for family members or close associates to represent them. Do you think that's growing? And do you have any thoughts on that particular aspect of the industry?
I mean, today it's not as easy as maybe 3-4 years ago to just ask a family member to help you, because today you do need to have a license to actually represent an individual. So even a father or an uncle or a friend or a brother cannot just, like they used to be able to, just sit next to you during, let's say, a negotiation and actually help you officially. So I think it's probably become a little bit less common within the last 3-4 years, but it used to be something that was, in my opinion, a big problem in the business. Because if you want to do your job in the best possible way as an agent, I think it's very important that the family accepts you, and especially the parents and brothers or sisters, or whoever, actually accepts being brothers and sisters and parents, not agents. Because if you are an agent and everyone has an opinion about what's next, then it's very difficult as an agent to do your job right. Will the parents listen to you? Will the family listen to you? So I think it's super important as a family to step back, take one step back, and let the agent advise you. And then, of course, in the end, it's always the family that will make the last decision. But, let the agent do what he's best at. He's not going to be the father or the mother or the sister or the brother. He's going to be a professional person who will always, hopefully, help you in making the right decision. And he's much better at giving you advice because he doesn't have the same feelings involved. He's not really the father of the player or whatever, So I think it's important to give space to the agent and let him do his job. And then you stay family. And you do that job as you have always done it.
And of course, the football agents industry is constantly changing, it's constantly evolving, and we're facing new challenges all the time. What do you see as the biggest challenges to agents and the football agency industry today?
Maybe FIFA. Because I think FIFA are challenging us. At the moment now, of course, things are a little bit on hold. What FIFA tried and are still trying to implement, I think it's a challenge for us because we are being somehow, presented as the bad ones, which for sure we are not. But I think FIFA are challenging our business, and that is a big challenge. Let's be honest, that's something we really have to take serious. And I think we need to make sure that our business will stay a business where hopefully the good ones are the ones that are working. And they also, make sure that the players are really helped and really advised in the best possible way. So in my opinion, that's how I see it.
And one final question for you, Mikkel. We're really grateful for your time. If you had one wish for the football agency industry, what would it be and why?
Probably that FIFA and us agents would try to come closer and understand each other better. So we could, at the end of the day, leave the business in the best possible way. So the agents have the best possible chances of doing their work in the best possible way. So I hope, going forward that FIFA understands this, because there are some good agents out there that actually do their job as they should do. But we also need to be taken serious and we need to be respected by FIFA. So this is my wish, at least going forward.
I don't think you'll find either Peter or I disagreeing with that, Peter.
Definitely not. No. The more collaboration, more cooperation, and more respect.
Yeah.
Because this is a difficult business. It's a hard business. It's a very competitive business. Very easy to gain clients, but also to lose clients. And really, I think FIFA needs to understand that it's not easy for a lot of agents, and that we do very good work and help a lot of people, not just players, but clubs, families, and other stakeholders.
Yeah, exactly. So we need the respect also. We need people to understand also that we actually do a big job. And without us, it wouldn't be the same. And that's said in a positive way, because you know very well that if you do your job well as an agent and you help a player, hand in hand with him, of course, to create a long and successful career, he couldn't have done it on his own. He would look back and say, it happened also because I had a fantastic team around me who made me concentrate just about football, nothing else. So, we play a big role in careers. Also clubs, what happens when the clubs have bought a player who is not doing well, and who do they look to? They look to the agents and say, please help us. So without us, clubs would also end up with too many players and not being able to offload them. We also come in, so the club agents, like we spoke about before, are also important agents, but the ones I speak for, the players' agents, give us respect. I think if we do our job in the right way, we are super important for families and players and clubs and whatever. Yeah, so I agree.
Mikkel, thank you so much for joining us here on the Agents Angle. I know you've had a very busy couple of months, and that seems to continue all the time. as you're now dashing off for yet another meeting. And that goes to prove an agent's work is never done. So thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome, and thanks for having me.
I think you know, Peter, Mikkel was for a long time my primary target to speak about the transition from player to agent, as although many have trodden that path, very few have, one, played internationally, as well as played consistently in top leagues around the world. Two, who had clients themselves who are also internationals and who play in top leagues. Three, have been successful and are active as agents. Four, done it independently without that large agency supporting them. And five, dare I say, actually operate as licensed agents rather than runners, consultants, and or supposedly scouts. And I have to admit, maybe my research needs a bit of improvement, as I didn't realise the background as to why Mikkel's career was cut short. And those sorts of circumstances could leave someone quite bitter towards a sport and not want to have anything more to do with it. But Mikkel's obviously dusted himself down and developed a successful career as an agent over some 20 years plus.
Yes, 20 years is a long time. I mean, admittedly, my research let me down a little bit here. I wasn't sure he played in Germany, and he did mention that. So that was something I overlooked. But a very insightful interview from the ex-player agent's perspective. He's also got a skill set. I think he mentioned 5 languages he speaks. So that's very important in the agent world. A lot of Danes know English and German, but learning French or Spanish or a couple of other languages really takes you to another level in the agent world, no doubt about it. But another thing that fascinated me in the discussion was he's at the top. Everyone wants to deal with top players, but he also mentioned he's interested in promoting and helping the careers of young, talented footballers to guide them to have big careers. And that's something that was very interesting for him. Also, the observations, and some of us agree with this, that now there maybe are too many agents, although I shouldn't say it on this show. But yes, there's the massive growth in number of agents, and that a lot of agents are finding it hard to sustain a business. And also, he observed, especially in the last decade or so, the power of the big agencies. And he deals at the top, so he sees that power firsthand. So a very, very interesting interview, Jonathan.
And coming back to that aspect of being multilingual and speaking all those variety of languages, that is definitely a huge benefit for an agent, as football is a global business. And many agents are dealing with overseas entities, if not international transfer opportunities all the time. But that multilingual aspect doesn't shield us from one complexity when player clients move to clubs abroad. And I'm referring to how they are paid, in what currency, and the implications of even transferring that money to another country.
Yes, we're going to talk about FOREX or foreign exchange in player contracts and considerations around that. I wanted to cover this, Jonathan, because I was inspired by a presenter at last year's Australian Football Agents Association conference, which was held in conjunction with the PFA, the Professional Football Australia, which are the player unions here. And they had a presentation on FOREX. And I'm just going to acknowledge Chris Broadfoot, who was an ex-A-League player, helps a lot of football professionals, rugby professionals, and other athletes. So he really has covered the ground. And that sort of, I suppose, planted the idea of something I want to cover, but from the agent's perspective. And dealing with FX or foreign exchange in countries is important for us agents who advise players, because we're dealing in an international sport and players are transferring everywhere. And we want to make sure players receive the best amount of money, because sometimes, even though your contract says you earn so much, foreign exchange can reduce what actually ends up in your pocket. And these are some tips that Chris put forward, but also I've researched. So when a player is going to sign an international contract, they need to understand the currency clauses in that contract. And there are 4 key questions to ask. And this is for agents and players when looking at what's going to be paid. And I'll go through the 4 questions. What currency I'll be paid in? Is it a currency that is not from the country that you're originally from? So is it US dollars? Is it euros? Is it pounds? Whatever it is. Who's going to cover the currency exchange fees? It's never addressed in the contract. But when a contract says it's going to be paid in pounds, it needs to be converted into euros because you're a European player, who covers that gap? Can the player or the agent on behalf of the player negotiate payments in a more stable currency? This applies maybe in non-euro or non-pound or non-US dollar markets or Australian dollar markets, where you've gone into other countries where you have a different currency, but you want your money in pounds or US dollars. You need to look that in the contract and try and negotiate that out. And finally, we all want to receive payment, the players. Are they going to have to pay in a local account that you need to set up or an overseas account? Because if it's transferred in an overseas account, it's going to be treated differently in terms of fees or exchange in a local account. So these are sort of some helpful tips when an agent approaches a contract. Now, it's always more helpful if you sign a contract in one of the major currencies, US dollars, euros, and pounds. But a lot of contracts, you get paid in local currency. I mean, I'll say in Asia, then Japan, Thailand, Malaysia, you're going to get paid in local currency. And if you need to exchange that money and say it's 2 or 3 different countries back to your home country, if you are dealing in 2 or 3 or 4 different currencies, you're going to lose because of poor exchange rates and fees. So that's something you need to keep in mind. Now, for European players, obviously, and agents, the euro is different, covers a lot of countries. The pound or the US dollar is different, but agents need to address these issues in the contracts. Some other things that agents need to be aware of when advising players, and they need to get special advice of this from an FX company or something like that, is to have a protective mechanism in place for foreign exchange. And one of those protective mechanisms is a forward contract. So I'll just give you a very brief example of that. Is if you're an athlete and you're signing an international contract, if you're a player, whatever you get paid, that's on the paper, doesn't always hit the same amount that lands in your local or your overseas bank account because exchange rates always fluctuate. So what is a forward contract? A forward contract is when dealing foreign exchange, you lock in a rate. So basically, you're avoiding the currency swings that happen. So you may have signed a $2 million contract, say, in a European club or in UK, but you need to send the money home. If you don't have a forward contract, if the exchange rate moves 5% in your favor, you might get 100,000. But if it moves 5% against you, you lose 100,000. And if it shifts more, you might lose a lot more money. So that's what a forward contract, something to look at for agents, to tell players that we may have to look at this, especially if they're getting big wages in a different currency, that you can lock in a rate. And that's to know when you sign an overseas deal, not in your home country, what is your actual take-home amount? It's very, very important. And when rates are strong in your favor, you want to secure that favorable outcome. Now, the same thing applies in sponsorship income. When you've got sponsorship income and a player has sponsors in different countries where they're playing, you need to know a little bit about what currency you agreed to get paid in. Does money to be sent onshore or offshore? And also, as I mentioned, ensure protection for maybe a forward contract or currency swings. And that's very important. The other final thing I want to say here, and this is not giving any advice, this is just talking about the concepts that agents need to be across, but get your specialist advice, is if you're not in a rush to transfer money overseas and you want to wait for a better rate before you do that, you can set a limit order, which is like a trigger rate to set the price you choose when you're going to transfer the money. So that is done by the FX company or the bank or whatever you decide. But these are the essential concepts. Know what to ask for in the contract negotiation about the currencies, and then look at some strategies, like I mentioned, a limit order or a forward contract to control those fluctuations, especially if you're playing in countries or a player's playing in countries we have a lot of exchange rates going up and down. So FX, very important for international players, and agents need to be across it right from the start when they look at the contract and they look at the amounts, and more importantly, they look at the currency that's going to be paid, especially if the player home country does not have that currency. Jonathan.
Absolutely. It's something like yourself I've dealt with as an agent, but tended to leave the complexities to the likes of the accountants or tax advisors. And I see the agent's role as more of a conduit between the parties to communicate these things effectively. But in that role, you still need to understand the core elements, if only to try and ensure everyone is protected from any nasty surprises, in particular the player clients. But on a very, very basic level, many years ago, and probably the first case that really switched me onto this aspect was a player at Chelsea. And I think it was Mikkel Beck, the former German captain. I may be wrong on that, though, so apologies if I am. And it was rumoured that the contract was quite unique at that time, in that the player's salary was paid partly in euros and partly in pounds sterling. And whether that was the agent, the player, or the club, it seemed sensible, if only insulating the player from fluctuations, as you said, in exchange rates between those two countries. And I'm going to steer clear at this point of the growing request I've heard of by some to get paid in Bitcoin or some other form of cryptocurrency where fluctuations, if not risks, can be far greater, albeit it seems to be a bit trendy and a bit of a cool thing to do at the moment. But agents need to be so aware of these elements, whether it be the very basics of their own representation agreements, and then apply that same awareness, rationale, and focus when it comes to clients and their employment contracts. And as you rightly said, the commercial deals as well. For me personally, in my rep agreements with clients, if a commission was related to a payment in a foreign currency, I'd take steps to ensure an exchange rate is specified, from where that exchange rate was taken, and when the exchange rate was applied. And that is before we start throwing tax aspects and net or gross into the equation. And that may seem pretty onerous to some, but I think it's pretty basic considerations for most, if not all, agents. And despite your best endeavors as an agent, you can't protect everything, whether it be yourself or a client. And I've been stung, and I'm sure a lot of other agents have from time to time, whether it be players, clubs, or other agents. And if those people are listening, and one case of an African player currently playing in the English Premier League springs readily to mind, as that related to exchange rate, I haven't forgotten, and I won't. And sadly, some of football regulations shield such people from an agent realistically pursuing such a claim. But that's a subject for another day. The sad fact is, as agents, whilst we're often portrayed by many as the villains of the industry, defrauding and exploiting people, very few actually highlight the cases where agents are effectively defrauded or even exploited by others. But it's sadly part of the industry, and new agents learn quite quickly about it. And unfortunately, quite often they learn the hard way.
Yes, indeed. And one thing I didn't point out that many players and agents have to have multi-currency accounts, maybe with a FOREX company or a bank, because if you're doing international deals, you may be dealing in different currencies, and having a multi-currency account may also be of assistance. But you mentioned a very good point. It's not just the players. You need to be advised on the FX. Us agents have to be aware how, when we do international deals, how the exchange rate, but also the tax that you mentioned, how in our business, how that affects us when we get paid our commission or fees or any transfers of money that come that for work that we've undertaken for clients or clubs. It's important for our own businesses to know how to deal with FX, the movement of money, and of course, where you pay tax or, value-added tax or whatever may be the case. So it's an important point. It's something we need to get educated on. But the key is, especially with international business as we are, FX is going to be an area that we need to understand and then get expert advice to help the player or our own business. But in the short term, when you're reviewing a contract, the FX is there, the currency is there. So you need to provide immediate advice to the player before they sign on the impact of that. And we've got to keep that in the back of our mind. Now, time to close off the show, and I'm going to mention one event, Jonathan, which is passing, but it was the FIFA's Football Law Annual Review 2025 held in Miami. It's on start on the 27th of February 2025. And there were some very interesting sessions. I have highlighted 3 that relate to the agent business. This was a good one because I think, having seen a lot of these football law annual reviews, this had at least 3 topics, maybe more. Sometimes a lot of agents don't want to look at the lawyer topics or the CAS topics, Court of Arbitration Sport topics. I would recommend a lot of the listeners and agents to have a look at these couple of topics. Football and the European Court of Justice, or the recent pending cases. which covered the Super League, European Super League, agents, the agent cases that we talked about, the German ones that referred to the ECJ, etc., and the Diarra case, which affects termination of contracts. Another interesting topic was bridge transfers, which are really back in vogue now, and that one is also worth looking at. And one for the toolkit of agents, the negotiation and understanding of clauses. We discussed clauses here today. And I think the third session really worth looking at is the buyout clauses, sell-on clauses, and other clauses in a transfer agreement. That's a session that we should look at. If you have time, they're the three I would recommend, and I think Jonathan will mimic that view. Just to finalise, please, we'll mainly focus on LinkedIn in our socials with posts, with polls, with the release of our quick takes, which has got news from around the agents world. Please share our posts with others and anyone interested. Also, send in some questions, any topics you'd like to hear. Today we had a former player turned agent, a fantastic topic. Next week, we're going somewhere very adventurous and interesting. I'm not going to spoil it now, or next week, in the fortnight, I should say. And I'm looking forward to that, Jonathan. It's bye and farewell from me.
So do you think we've actually managed it? You almost slipped up at the end of there, but a whole episode of the agent's angle without uttering those dreaded 4 letters, let alone some of the topics surrounding it. But I think we may just have managed it. So until the next episode of the agent's angle, everyone do take care of yourselves, and we'll try for as long as possible to keep the show away from the topic and even the slightest mention of FX.
The purpose of the Agent's Angle podcast is to provide news, information and facilitate discussion on regulatory matters, policies, business trends and issues affecting football agents worldwide. The opinions and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only and should never be considered legal or professional advice. Furthermore, the views expressed by guests are their own and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Thank you for listening.